Superman 2 might be the laziest sequel of all time. We all know that movie sequels tend to rehash a lot of elements from the original, but there's one scene in Superman 2 that takes it to the next level. Remember the ending of the first Superman movie? When our hero flies at light speed around the world in order to reverse time and undo the death of his lover, Lois Lane? Well, apparently that ending was so good that the filmmakers just decided to use it again in Superman 2. Don't believe me? Take a look for yourself. That's pretty terrible, but what might shock you is that technically, Superman 2 actually didn't use this ending. At least, not in the version that you probably saw. This finale is from a different version of Superman 2 called the Donner Cut, and it changes way more than just the ending. Remember the opening sequence where Superman saves Paris from a nuclear bomb in the Eiffel Tower? Yeah, that's completely gone in the Donner Cut. Oh, and did you ever think it was weird that we never saw Superman's father Jor-El in this movie? Well, in this version, Marlon Brando is back.
That's the old man. He looks just like the kid.
You might have a few questions by now. Where did all these scenes come from? Why weren't they used in the original version of the movie? Does the film actually get rid of that strange fight sequence at the end, where Superman throws a cellophane wrapper at his enemies? Yes, it does. And most importantly, is this movie better than the Superman 2 that showed up in theaters? The short answer is not really. The long answer is a bit more complicated. But before we get into that, we have to do a little bit of time travel ourselves, about 50 years into the past. March 24th, 1977. That's the day that two big Hollywood movies both started shooting. The first was Superman the Movie, directed by Richard Donner. And the second was Superman 2, also directed by Richard Donner. You see, the movies were produced by Alexander Salkind and his son Ilya, as well as their business partner Pierre Spengler. They realized that if they could turn Superman into a franchise, they'd save money now by shooting the original film and its sequel back to back. But producing twice as many films can mean twice as many problems, and it wasn't long before the Salkinds' relationship with their director started to go south over budget concerns.
Would go on the set, I would just stand there to, put more pressure. But it was horrible.
It got so bad, I couldn't talk to them. I couldn't stand the sight of them, quite honestly. And I just, stay away from me. Stay off the goddamn set.
They were eventually forced to halt production on Superman 2 just so they could focus on finishing the first film in time. Now, fast forward to December 15th, 1978. Superman the Movie hits theaters and is a monster success, grossing $300 million worldwide and turning Christopher Reeve into a bona fide star. Donner was excited to get back to work and finish Superman 2, until he received a telegram.
I was ready to go, and I get a telegram one day. It says, your services will no longer be needed. Richard Lester is taking over. I was ready to get on an airplane and kill, because they were taking my baby away from me.
So, who was this Richard Lester, the newly installed director of Superman 2?
One of my favorite directors!
He had made the films A Hard Day's Night and Help with the Beatles, which were huge hits. In fact, he had been brought on board during the production of the first Superman to act as a liaison between Donner and the producers when their relationship went sour. So he was already familiar with the production. Reports vary on how much footage Donner had already shot when Lester took over, but it seems he had shot around 70-80% of the original script. However, because of guild requirements, Lester had to toss out a lot of Donner's footage and insert new scenes that he had shot to replace them, giving him enough ownership over the final version to qualify for a director's credit.
I don't think there is a film that had so much footage shot and not used.
Despite all the production drama, Superman 2 eventually released in the US on June 19th, 1981. It made $108 million domestically, doubling its production budget and becoming the third highest grossing movie that year. But what happened to all that footage Donner shot? For years, it languished in Warner Brothers' vaults, as Donner had no interest in putting together his own version of Superman 2. So, the fans had to do it for him. In 2004, we got the first alternate cut of Superman 2, called the Restored International Cut. It was put together by an anonymous group of fans who had recorded international TV broadcasts of Superman 2 that had some of Donner's alternate footage spliced in. They took these recordings and compiled their own rough version of what Donner's Superman 2 would have looked like, and even shared it for free on a website. And the momentum didn't stop there. Fan websites started campaigning for the studio to open its wallet and put together an official cut using Donner's footage. All that pestering seemed to work, as Warner Brothers eventually began work on an alternate cut of Superman 2, led by Michael Thal, who worked as Donner's assistant in the 80s. Eventually, Donner agreed to join in on the process too.
Put that back in. Boy, oh boy.
Boy, Michael, what must you have been thinking?
Boy, oh boy. Would you drink a lot during the day?
Finally, in 2006, fans were treated to an official release of the long-awaited Donner cut.
Here's Superman 2 with as much of my work as could be salvaged. Because of all your requests and all your asking, it came to be. I just got a kick out of seeing it, something I never thought would happen. It was quite emotional, quite exciting. 30 years. I hope you all enjoy it.
So, both the fans and Donner got their wish. Not only was Donner's original vision for Superman 2 restored, but all of the unnecessary and ill-advised changes by Lester got removed as well, resulting in a Superman sequel worthy of the original. The good guys won in the end. Or at least, that's how most people frame this story. But the truth is, I don't think the Donner cut is all it's cracked up to be. And in some places, the Lester cut is actually better than Donner's version. Let's break down both cuts and take a look for ourselves.
Man, this is going to be good.
When compared to the Donner cut, the number one complaint against Lester's version is the level and tone of the humor, the most famous example being Here's Donner's explanation for why he didn't like Lester's approach.
I felt that this director kind of reverted back to the face value of the comic book rather than the heart. And reality was lost for me. And therefore, as much as possible, tried to remove as much of his footage without making a major hole in the storytelling.
And here's an example of what Donner's talking about from a scene at the Fortress of Solitude in the Lester cut.
Right? Test marker.
Donner's got a point, right? That kind of cringy humor doesn't really feel like it fits in a Superman movie. Except, that joke was actually from Donner's version. It's not in the Lester cut at all. This becomes a pattern throughout the movie. Sure, Donner removed a lot of cringy bits like the man falling in the telephone booth, or some of the jokes when the Kryptonians confront the redneck sheriff. But he also added in plenty of jokes that don't work either. Take this bit from the scene in the prison with Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor and Ned Beatty's Otis.
Those alpha waves will take me north to his secret. And his secret will give me Superman.
In the Lester cut, it ends at that point. But Donner added in an extra gag in his cut.
And when I have his secret, I'll have Superman. Slicer Fogelstein's a bedwetter.
Smasher Fogelstein's a bedwetter. Pass it. Hi, Mr. Fogelstein.
In some cases, he even replaces a joke that worked better in the Lester cut. After the astronauts on the moon get attacked by Zod and his crew, this exchange between the mission control technicians is kinda silly, but at least it feels a bit natural.
I thought he said curl.
What's a curl?
Well, isn't that what the old Canaveral guys used to call a comet with an east-west trajectory?
How should I know? I was back in high school in those days.
In the Donner cut, though, it shoehorns in a cheap joke.
Artemis, come in, please.
All right. Which one of you guys is using the hairdryer?
Overall, I think Lester gets unfairly maligned for the humorous tone of Superman 2, when the Donner cut doesn't do a ton to fix that, and even makes some of it worse. That said, I do think Donner's version makes some smart choices, particularly when it comes to the opening scenes of the movie. In Lester's version, there's a sequence absent from the Donner cut where Superman has to save Lois and the city of Paris from terrorists with a nuclear bomb who've taken control of the Eiffel Tower. Superman saves the day by taking the bomb into space where it explodes, coincidentally freeing the Kryptonians from the Phantom Zone. I don't really have that many problems with this scene. It's a fun sequence that shows Superman saving Paris from being blown up by Uncle Vernon from Harry Potter. However, the Donner cut completely removes the Paris sequence and comes up with a different reason for Zod and his minions escaping their prison. After the opening Krypton trials scene ends with Zod and crew getting trapped in the Phantom Zone, we get a brief recap of the finale of the first movie, with Superman intercepting one of Luthor's nuclear missiles and launching it into space before it explodes. And that's what actually frees the Kryptonians in this version of the movie. Sure, we can quibble about the special effects of this new sequence, and yeah, I'm not sure why we need the recap of Superman and Miss Tessmacher's kiss, but overall, I think this opening does a much better job of tying the events of the first movie to this one, making it feel much more like a continuation of the story, not just a sequel to the original. And it builds more suspense by ending on a cliffhanger showing Zod, Ursa, and Non heading to Earth, so we already have a sense of the threat Superman is facing before the credits have even started. While that's a relatively small change, the Donner cut makes some bigger ones when it comes to Margot Kidder's Lois. In both cuts of Superman 2, Lois has pretty much the same arc, where she begins to suspect Clark is Superman and eventually has her suspicions confirmed. In Lester's version, Lois doesn't really get suspicious until Superman saves the boy at Niagara Falls, and she starts to piece together that Clark is always missing whenever Superman shows up. Contrast that with Donner's version. Lois is suspicious of Clark from the very first scene, and takes the rather drastic step of testing him right away by throwing herself out of the window of the Daily Planet skyscraper. Again, Clark manages to save her without revealing his identity. Here's why Donner and his writing partner on the Superman movies, Tom Mankiewicz, prefer this scene to Lester's version.
Why does a scene like this work better? Why is it better, Tom? Why does it work better?
Because it is a startling beginning to the film when she does what she's about to do. This is just the most wonderful way to open a movie.
Yeah.
You know, you're right into it again.
I love you guys, but I don't know about that. There's just something off with Lois's behavior here. Even knowing her brash personality, she comes off as really dumb to throw herself out of a window on the whim that Clark might be Superman. And even though Clark does save her and avoids outing himself, the manner in which he does it is so unlikely that it doesn't make sense for Lois not to still be suspicious. I much prefer how Lester handles this beat in his version. He saves Lois's daredevil tactics for later in the story, so she doesn't seem as impulsive. And to test Clark, she throws herself into some rapids, which makes a lot more sense than throwing herself out of a skyscraper. In Lester's version, Clark accidentally reveals who he is when he stumbles into a fire and is unharmed. So, how does Lois find out Clark's identity in the Donner cut? Well, Donner never actually shot his version of that scene for Superman 2, so he had to resort to using footage he shot as part of the auditions for Reeve and Margot Kidder before production had even started on Superman 1. And unfortunately, it doesn't look great, which is a shame because it's actually a really wonderful scene. Here, Lois tricks Clark by threatening to shoot him with a gun to prove he's invincible. After she fires the gun and Clark appears unharmed, he fesses up that he's Superman, only for us to learn,
if you'd been wrong, Clark Kent would have been killed.
With a blank? Gotcha.
I like this scene for a couple reasons. It's a nice twist that gives Lois more agency in the story. There's more tension here than there is in Lester's version. And I like to think this scene gives Superman the idea of how to trick Zod and company into giving up their powers in the finale. In short, it's got a lot going for it. It's just a shame that Donner never got the chance to really shoot it like he wanted to. But Lois isn't the only supporting character who gets more to do in the Donner cut. This version brings back a pretty big character from the first movie, who didn't even make the Lester cut.
I mean, how do you cut Marlon Brando out of a picture?
They cut Marlon Brando out?
How did too?
Yes, Miss Tessmacher. It's a little strange you didn't know this until now, since you were in the movie, but they in fact did cut Marlon Brando out of Superman 2. Even though Donner had already shot all of Brando's scenes for the movie, the Salkinds would have had to pay the actor even more money if they included him in the final version. So, they dropped his scenes. But how could they replace the father of Superman? Easy. They just swapped in the mother. All of Brando's scenes were reshot with Susanna York, who plays Laura, the Man of Steel's mom. It was a clever solution financially, if not artistically. One of the Donner cut's big changes was bringing Brando back. Even if it doesn't look, well, spectacular, again, it brings more connective tissue between the first film and the second by emphasizing the father-son relationship. And there's a lot more going on in the Donner cut version of these scenes too. In the theatrical cut, Superman's conversation with his mother is pretty short and bereft of any sort of conflict. He's basically just telling his mom what he's about to do.
Oh, my son, are you sure?
Mother? I love her.
But in the Donner cut, Superman and Jor-El actually argue about his role as protector of Earth, giving some more weight to the scene.
Is this how you repay their gratitude? By abandoning the weak, the defenseless, the needy for the sake of your selfish pursuits?
Selfish? After all I've done for them? Will there ever come a time when I've served enough? At least they get a chance for happiness. I only ask as much, no more.
And even though Superman regaining his power so quickly is shoddy writing that affects both versions of the movie, I do like that they at least tried to introduce a cost to his actions in the Donner cut by killing Jor-El, or his hologram at least, as a result of Superman getting his powers back. However, even without Brando, Lester actually still did a decent job with his arc in his movie as well. I mean, take a look at these shots of Clark Kent returning to the Fortress of Solitude after losing his powers. The Donner version is brightly lit, looking exactly the same as all the rest of the scenes in the fortress. But Lester's lighting choices add a lot more atmosphere to the proceedings, especially the ethereal green glow, emphasizing how weakened Superman is at this point. And there's another element at play here: the sound. When Superman loses his powers in the Donner cut, the score is turned up to 11, making it as bombastic as possible to emphasize the moment. I mean, it works fine, but Lester does something more interesting in his version. That transformation sequence might seem a little dated these days, but instead of beating us over the head with the music, Lester opts to only use sound effects to carry us through the sequence. It's a nice touch that puts us more on edge as we watch Superman doing something we all know he shouldn't be doing. And I like that he keeps us in silence immediately after Clark steps out of the chamber, adding to the eeriness of the scene, before finally bringing in the music when he embraces Lois. That attention to detail with the music is actually something I think Lester handles better than Donner does, which is surprising considering Lester didn't have John Williams. According to some reports, Williams didn't get along with Lester and refused to do the film, so they brought in composer Ken Thorne. While Thorne obviously had to use a lot of Williams' iconic music from the first movie, he did a good job of putting his own stamp on the film. When Donner started making his cut, Williams couldn't contribute as he was busy scoring Revenge of the Sith. So Donner used what cues he already had from Williams to replace a lot of Thorne's music. But he made some strange choices. For example, take the scene where Lex Luthor enters the White House to bargain with Zod. In the Lester cut, we get to hear Luthor's theme as he enters.
Hello there. Lex Luthor.
But in the Donner cut, he removed that to put in some generic cue we've never heard before.
Hello there. Lex Luthor.
This happens again and again throughout the movie, with Donner removing or altering a lot of the leitmotifs and replacing them for no apparent reason. It really feels like he was removing Thorne's music just for the sake of it. Here again, I much prefer Thorne's creepy intro for the Kryptonians arriving to Earth. But in the Donner cut, it's more bombastic and obvious. To be sure, these are tiny differences, but they add up to a lot over time. Meanwhile, there's still one big change between the two cuts that we need to talk about: the ending. When Donner and his writing partner, Tom Mankiewicz, conceived of the story for Superman 1 and 2, they had planned to use Superman reversing time as the finale for Part 2. But they were missing something crucial. They didn't have an ending for Part 1.
The ending of the movie, which this is all pointing to, with Lois getting hurt and him turning the world backward, was the ending of the second movie, turning the world backward.
Oh, you're right.
And
We
everybody
needed, desperation.
was worried. First of all, we didn't have as good an ending for the first movie.
Right.
And everybody said, my God, if this first one's a disaster, maybe there won't be a two.
And like I mentioned earlier, they got so behind on filming that they eventually had to shelve Superman 2 and focus on finishing Part 1. So, since finishing Part 2 wasn't necessarily guaranteed, the filmmakers decided to use that ending for Part 1. Some sources say that it was Lester who came up with this idea in the first place, but either way, Donner and Mankiewicz figured they would just think up an ending for 2 later. But that moment never came because Donner got canned by the Salkinds. So, what did the filmmakers come up with for the Lester version? At the end of the film, Lois now knows Clark's real identity, and she's upset that she can't express her love for him. The two share a heartfelt scene at the Daily Planet, at which point Clark apparently manages to erase her memory with a supercharged kiss of some sort.
What was I talking about before? If I know you, it was probably about Superman.
No matter how you slice it, it's a strange ending that raises all sorts of questions. Does Lois just forget everything that happened to her over the course of the movie? What is she supposed to think when she sees the damage from Zod and Superman's fight in downtown Metropolis? She's not going to wonder what she did during that time, or why she can't remember any of it? And when did Superman have the power to trigger amnesia in someone by making out with them? It certainly wasn't in the comics, although some fans mistakenly think so. Not only is the amnesia kiss a deus ex machina, but it undoes Lois's entire arc, bringing her character right back to square one, where she was at the start of the movie. But as bad as the kiss is, there are even more issues with Donner's new ending. In this version, Superman once again reverses time, undoing the entire events of Superman 2. No revealing his identity to Lois, no dramatic battle between him and Zod in the city, and no freeing of the Kryptonians from the Phantom Zone. Look, I'm one of those people who never even liked Superman turning back time in the first movie, but it worked way better there than it does here. At least in the first movie, it had some emotional grounding. It was tied to Superman's anger over Lois's death and his defiance against his father over using his powers as he deemed fit. Here, it's just not as effective, partly because we've seen it before, and partly because the justification for it is even weaker. In all fairness to Donner, he says he would have shot a completely different ending had he never been booted from the sequel. But tossing in this ending onto his own version decades later feels like changing things for the sake of changing things, rather than enhancing the movie's story. And while the amnesia kiss is far from perfect, at least it has the nuance that Clark is willing to sacrifice Lois's love to protect her from the heartbreak of not being together. It's a messy way to do it, but it works better than, well, erasing all the events from the movie. When you consider all these aspects, is the Donner cut an improvement over the theatrical cut? Or does it pale in comparison to Lester's version? Lester took a lot of flack for introducing goofy humor into the movie, and although some of that criticism is deserved, the Donner cut is an even bigger offender in that department, adding several jokes that should have been left on the cutting room floor. Plus, Lester's use of Ken Thorne's music does a serviceable job compared to Donner's cues, which feel like they were slapped on mainly just to replace Thorne's music. And while the amnesia kiss may not be an airtight ending, it works way better than Superman turning back time, which feels cheap and unearned, even if you've never seen Superman 1. That's not to say the Donner cut is devoid of merit. It restores a lot of connective tissue between Superman 1 and 2 by reworking the beginning of the movie. Plus, it gives more screen time to Lois and Jor-El, fleshing out their roles in Superman's arc. But even these aspects have their own issues within the Donner cut. The effects are distractingly shoddy, and some of the scenes just run on too long or feel redundant. Although both versions contain plenty of flaws, I have to say, I prefer the Lester cut.
Kind of an anticlimax.
We're primed to think that director's cuts are inherently better because they represent the true vision of the filmmakers, finally freeing them from commercial interference from the studio or the producers. But the Donner cut makes that distinction less clear-cut. This feels more like a filmmaker desperately trying to put his own stamp on a movie he never got to finish, only to realize he doesn't have all the elements he needs.
He also didn't want to deal too much with the Lester scenes that needed to be left in to make a complete story. But I realized after a while that he had been familiar with those scenes, and they hurt him, I think. That was always a sore spot.
This video only represents the biggest issues I found between both cuts. There are plenty of other changes I decided not to mention here, such as the alternate color grades, or the different lines Donner subbed in, or even, whatever this is. I may make a video on them later, but if you guys are interested in more on Superman 2, I strongly recommend you to check out these videos from Nerdwriter and Michael in Lo-Fi. I'll link both videos in the description. And for those curious to check out both versions for yourself, I'll also list in the description a few options for where you can watch both cuts. As always, let me know which version you guys prefer in the comments. And thanks for watching.